In her massive upscale Los Angeles home, Karen Carr is startled awake by strange noises downstairs. Meanwhile, her husband, Michael Carr, is in his home office, on a heated call with a work associate. She brings their tabby cat Tiny to his office and informs him about the noises, but he dismisses her worries, blaming the noise on the wind or the cat. Michael feels that Tiny hates him. Karen's quick to defend her pet, advising him to pay more attention to Tiny if he really wants to earn his loyalty. Michael quips that Tiny would only favor him if he doled out as many treats as Karen does, to which she jokes that he's just jealous of the cat. That's true. He does get to spend more time with Karen while Michael's having his long work nights. Though his job is stressful, he at least has a loving and supportive wife, who he treasures. Suddenly, they hear another noise from downstairs, so Michael finally volunteers to investigate despite Karen's idea to call the police. Instead, he arms himself with a golf club and heads downstairs, checking for open windows and potential hiding spots for a trespasser. In the meantime, Karen occupies herself with reading documents in the office. Michael doesn't find anything amiss, so he goes to grab a drink, only to discover that the skylight window in the kitchen is open. This has him on high alert as he grabs his golf club again, and in doing so, he accidentally drops the bottle. Hearing the glass break, a worried Karen rushes out of the office and meets Michael at the staircase. Just then, a large man in dark clothes bursts out of a closet, knocking the man down. Horrified, Karen quickly tries to call the police, but the intruder lunges at her. Michael hurries to her aid, but stops upon seeing the intruder holding his wife at knife point. He begs the man to not hurt his wife, and even offers him anything he wants. Unmoved, the intruder drags Karen towards an exit, all while using her as a shield. He pushes her into the pool before quickly making his getaway, leaving Michael as he helplessly watches in fear for Karen's safety. After a while, Los Angeles police officers, Roy Cole and his partner, Pete Davis, arrive at the scene. Roy is a level-headed man, while Pete is the more friendly and reassuring of the two. The couple is made to recount their harrowing experience while Tiny emerges, and he surprisingly warms up to the officers. Roy informs them another officer will come by to collect fingerprints from the open skylight window. According to Pete, there have been a few break-ins lately in the neighborhood, likely done by the same guy. Karen heads to the kitchen barefoot to make the men coffee, but a concerned Pete stops her and removes a glass shard from the floor to prevent her from injuring her foot. Karen's very worried about another incident happening again in their neighborhood, but Pete assures her that things are safe now. The intruder could have been scared off by Michael, who now wants to get a gun to protect themselves with. Karen strongly opposes this, and the officers agree. He's better off with an alarm system or a watchdog because the wrong people always get hurt with guns. In the police car, Roy comments on Pete's actions toward the couple, hinting he knows what Pete is thinking. Meanwhile, Karen is left traumatized by the experience. She can't stop thinking about how the man grabbed her. Unable to sleep, she decides that she wants to sell the house, but Michael manages to dissuade her from the idea. Instead, he yields to the officer's suggestion to get a home security system, and probably a watchdog to soothe Karen's worries. The next morning, Michael is in the middle of a pitch to a new client when an anxious Karen calls because the home security people have not yet arrived, and the police haven't collected the fingerprints. He instructs her to call the police station and asks specifically for Roy and Pete. When Michael comes home, the security team is installing the system, and a policewoman is collecting fingerprints. He hears Karen's laugh and discovers Pete, dressed in civilian attire, overseeing the installation. Pete humbly accepts the couple's gratitude for his help, earning their trust and friendship. After the installation, Pete even explains how the system works. Michael notes that Pete has a knack for this kind of stuff, so he offers him a security consulting role. He's been putting together a club, and all Pete will do is the stuff he's doing now, but he's getting paid for his time. Karen also invites him to dinner, and though he makes it clear that he doesn't want to cross the line of professionalism cops and civilians should have separating them, Michael slyly dismisses his sentiments and ushers him to come along. After dinner, the officer expresses how nice this evening has been. Usually, dinner for him is just them cops sharing war stories. When asked if he's ever been married, Pete says no, and Michael says that Karen will try to line him up with one of her friends. However, the dinner is interrupted by a neighbor's dog who leaps over the fence, frightening Karen. Michael's used to the old girl's shenanigans by now, so he goes after her to give her back to her owner. While he's gone, Pete says that he can't believe he's talking so much now. He used to be famous for being quiet in school, to which Karen says that as a teacher, she loves the quiet types at the back of the class. When Michael comes back, he says that Karen loves all kinds of kids, and this is when Pete gets his eureka moment. That's what's missing in their house: kids. The couple doesn't say anything, and when Michael walks Pete over to his car, the man apologizes for bringing up children. That really wasn't his business, but Michael assures him it's all right. Once more, he thanks him for his help, and soon, he expresses how angry and frustrated he is over what happened. What's worse is he genuinely felt helpless seeing another man put his hands on his wife like that. Pete says he had a lot of balls going up to the intruder like that, but Michael's unconvinced. Oh, what he'd give to have another shot at that freak. Pete's rather taken aback by this, but Michael doubles down on wanting to beat the hell out of that guy. Pete doesn't seem to take what Michael's saying seriously. He already knows what he would do, but he isn't sure about a nice and civilized guy like Michael wanting to get his hands dirty like that. Well, after what the intruder did to Karen, Michael would love to rip his heart out. Smiling, Pete comments that he's a scary guy before getting in his car. He then invites Michael to join him and Roy on a patrol the next night, and with just a bit of convincing, he accepts. Michael and Karen likely never expected to be victims of a break-in. They've always lived in a safe neighborhood. Their home was posh, a symbol of their affluence and success. However, the traumatic break-in shattered their sense of security. Life was still so fragile despite the perceived safety of their supposedly secure environment. It exposed Michael to his own weaknesses and inability to save Karen, who seems quite high-strung. They're fortunate that Pete is there to help and that he's very involved in enforcing the security of their home. Perhaps a little too involved. Pete clearly has troubles forming personal relationships. His lack of marriage, his lack of connections outside the force, and his little anecdote of being a kid who never talked in class. They all paint a lonely picture of him, and perhaps that's why he just latched onto the couple, as Michael and Karen are treating him very kindly. However, he and Michael are now blurring the lines between cops and civilians, and with Pete quickly growing attached to him and Karen, this could spell trouble. Joining Roy and Pete, Michael gets an insight on the pair's daily life. For one, women would speed on purpose to get their attention because cops are like celebrities to them. A woman even approaches Michael after mistaking him for one. While the officers enjoy their meal, the irrepressible businessman suggests hiring off-duty police to work at his club, just like he did in Phoenix and Kansas City. But the pair doesn't take him seriously. Their next call is much more serious than the others they received all night. A frantic and sobbing woman is screaming her house down, yelling at her jailbird of a man, or ex rather, to get out. He ends up hitting another man who's present there, causing him to bleed. Roy and Pete quickly interfere, and while everyone's occupied, a little boy escapes through the window. He runs across the street, spurring Michael to rush in and save him from the incoming car. Concerned, Michael tries to calm the kid while the cops escort the violent man out. But when the woman taunts him, he frees himself from Pete's hold to choke and punch her. This has Roy tackling him, while Michael embraces the poor kid to stop him from running up to his mother. Back at the station, Pete tells Roy to get some rest, while he and Michael take care of one last errand. They pull up to a grimy building covered with graffiti, and Michael, sitting in the passenger seat, watches as Pete drags out a man. To his surprise, it's none other than the man who held Karen at knife point, Ernie Pike. Pete caught his crackhead buddy earlier, and the guy ratted him out. Though this is supposed to be Michael's time to unleash his supposed ruthlessness, it's Pete who's disturbingly cruel. Gone is the friendly and harmless-seeming cop Michael knew, as Pete shows just how unnerving he can be. He yells at Ernie, slaps him around, pushes him around, and antagonizes him. Pete treats him like he's less than the crap beneath his shoe, and Ernie's helpless to it all. But Pete is doing this all for Michael. He wants his buddy to beat the living crap out of Ernie like he said he wanted to. And when Michael nervously answers that he just said those things in the heat of the moment, Pete continues goading Ernie. He wants the man to say that he broke into their house so he could have his way with Karen's uptown body, and to appease the increasingly violent officer, a terrified Ernie just goes along with it. Grabbing him by the face, Pete drags Ernie towards Michael and convinces him to hit the guy with his baton. Listen, he resisted. He gets hit. Crap happens, he says without any shred of remorse. But no matter how many times he yells at Michael to just hit him, the man keeps resisting. Eventually, Ernie breaks free and runs away, but Pete just throws his baton at him, making him fall. He wails on Ernie, bashing him repeatedly with the baton until Michael screams at him to stop, and the bloodthirsty Pete can only breathlessly stare at him in response. At home, Karen asks about the ride-along, to which an uncomfortable Michael shares that Pete caught the guy. While she's relieved to hear this, she grows confused when he tells her that they can't hang with Pete anymore. Karen suggests that he's exaggerating, and that he deserves the benefit of the doubt because of what he's done for them, but he just tells her that he's the one who saw what Pete did, so he doesn't care what she thinks. Those words set Karen off, and she promises not to do any thinking from now on. He tries to defuse the situation, but she only says that a weight's been lifted off her, and she doesn't share any of his newfound sympathy with their invader. The next morning, Pete visits Karen while she's swimming in her pool, and describes a fabricated version of how he caught the intruder. The guy knocked him down, ran away, and things got ugly. Hesitant, Karen notes that his story's different from Michael's, and he only implies that her husband's just shaken up. It's not a movie set out there in the field. He proceeds to show her a scar on his chest, which he claims to have gotten from getting shot while breaking up a domestic dispute. That's why he restrains first with everything he's got. He doesn't need another bullet to his chest, and she doesn't need a dead husband. Karen understands this and offers her sympathy and gratitude. At the private party in Michael's club, he's talking to his investors, Jerry Lurie and his wife Candace, along with his lawyer, Robert Graham. Suddenly, Pete shows up and interrupts their conversation to introduce himself and talk about fortifying the security in the place. He's acting like nothing happened between him and Michael, who's clearly uncomfortable with his presence. He manages to get Pete off his hair by telling him to go get drinks. So Pete approaches Karen, who introduces her co-teacher and friend, Penny. Penny is clearly smitten by him, and even invites him to give a speech at her class. Later on, Michael confronts Pete and demands that he stay away from him and Karen. Insisting that he was only looking out for his best interest, Pete reveals to Michael about patrolling around Carr's neighborhood late the previous night. That's how he knows that Michael didn't go to bed until well past 3 because the lights were on. Naturally, this just puts off Michael even more, leaving Pete to think that he's just bitter because he doesn't have guts like he does. Noticing the tension, Karen approaches and tries to get Michael to go to Roger, but her husband's adamant about kicking Pete out. Pete insists that he's just being a friend, but Michael asserts that they aren't buddies. Karen gets irritated by Michael refusing to let up, so she walks away. With her gone, Pete coldly asks Michael what he's going to do. Is he calling the cops? Unable to tolerate him further, Michael cusses him out and yells at him to get out. but Pete just tells him to lower his voice because the pigeon's watching. Despite the car's initial disagreement, they soon toast with the visitors, celebrating the success of the club, while Pete looks on in quiet, jealous rage. He calls a woman and hooks up with her in his car, but while the woman clearly likes him and is trying her best to connect with him, Pete's all distant. She asks about his gunshot wound, but he dismissively tells her that he got it from fishing. Eventually, the woman drops her playful and hopeful demeanor to ask him what's wrong, but that just sends Pete over the edge. He snaps that his only problem are sleazy, low-life hoes like her before kicking the poor woman out of his car. She has no idea where she is, and her clothes aren't even on properly, but Pete doesn't care. He just drives off. That same man would go on to give a talk to the kids at Karen and Penny's school. His speech is all about how policemen are supposed to help people, and the women are impressed by the way he handles the kids. They clearly like him too. After his talk, Karen tries to apologize for Michael's behavior at the club. Once again, Pete lies about Michael inviting him, and how he wouldn't have gone to the club if he didn't. She assures him that Michael's out of sorts, not him. After some hesitation, Karen agrees to have coffee with him at a diner that's mostly visited by cops. He learns that Karen met Michael while waitressing, which was her first job. She didn't need to work before because she's well off, but her father had a gambling problem, and she'd wake up to their things being repossessed. She also shares that things come easy to Michael, and Pete asks if she's one of those things, which offends her. He adds that for all of Michael's good fortune, he's too weak and cowardly to care for her properly, and offers his own sincere help and friendship when she needs them. Roy later confronts Pete about spending time with Karen, and when he shows no remorse, Roy disappointedly walks away. There are times when Michael and Pete almost look similar to each other, and that's likely intentional. You look at them from a distance, you see two upstanding men in respected fields. You talk to them, and they both know the right things to say. They're perfectly amicable. But then, you see how Tiny treats them. Tiny lets Pete pick him up, but the same can't be said with Michael, almost like the cat knows better than to resist Pete, and it's definitely wise not to. He's able to hide his sinister, harmful, and aggressively prejudiced ways not behind his badge, but behind the helpful, doe-eyed persona he created for himself. The way he lies so effortlessly, immediately after he does the very thing he says he didn't, you'd think Pete believes his own crap, but he doesn't, because he knows his power. Pete may be delusional over Karen, but he's perfectly aware of what he can do and what he can get away with. He said as much to Michael while inviting him to the patrol. Pete knows what he wants to do, but what about Michael? It isn't that Michael's a weak man necessarily, but just one without a mind for senseless violence. Perhaps Pete saw a kindred spirit in Michael when he started spouting the things he'd do to their intruder. Maybe he saw it as a way to test him, but either way, all Pete got is that Michael's a weak man who's unfit to protect Karen. He subtly emasculated him in the club, saying that Michael's bitter because he can't be more like him. Now, he's planting the same seeds in Karen's mind, that Michael is incapable, that he's just like her father whose weakness will never keep her safe. After all, things come so easy for him. What does he know about grit, strength, and will? Even with getting security for his club, he seemed to be trying to take the easy route by eyeing some cops for it. While Michael's just some spoiled, white-collar yuppie who Pete believes got Karen through wealth alone, Pete is a hardened man who spends his nights patrolling the town and being around the downtrodden. Another thing of note is that this doesn't seem to be the first time Pete's pulled something like this. Roy's disappointment but lack of surprise when he mentioned Pete's dinner with Karen and him saying, "I know what you're thinking" in the beginning hint at that. During a dinner with Graham, Lurie, and his wife, and Karen, Michael tries to pay for the dinner with his card, but it gets declined, ending with Graham covering the meal. Michael is surprised and dismayed, but the others dismiss it as a glitch. His frustration grows when he finds his car tire clamped for a $600 parking ticket he never received, and both of his cards are again declined. At home, the security alarm goes off as Michael and Karen are about to make love. Michael arms himself with a small pistol and locks Karen in the bathroom, warning her not to come out. He returns a little later with their cat, Tiny, saying the cat probably set off the alarm by knocking over one of the screens. Karen feels betrayed because Michael has bought a gun without telling her, but Michael stands his ground. He doesn't want them to go through what they did ever again. The couple makes up, and while they continue their lovemaking session, Pete suddenly enters their room. He doesn't say anything for several seconds as he simply stares at the two, but he soon lights his flashlight, startling Michael and Karen. Furious, Michael chases him downstairs and demands an explanation. Pete claims the alarm notified him of a possible break-in, but Michael accuses him of causing the alarm. He also blames him for his recent misfortunes, saying he's sabotaging him out of spite for rejecting his friendship. Determined to get rid of Pete from their lives, Michael files a complaint, but it bears no effect at all due to the lack of evidence and Pete's good reputation as a decorated officer. Captain Russell Hayes reassures Michael that necessary action will be taken if the allegations are proven. Michael learns from Graham that Lurie is backing out of their business deal because Pete called him, which raised some red flags to the investor. To fix this, a frustrated Graham advises him to just bribe the cop under the guise of donating to his favorite charity. However, when Michael tries to give him $5,000 and an apology, Pete refuses his bribe. He goes on to say that Karen thought he'd be different from her gambling father. But in the end, she can't feel safe around Michael either, and Karen needs to be protected. Michael snaps at him to stay the hell away from her, but Pete just attacks him. When Michael falls to the ground, he grabs him by the hair and asks why a civilized gentleman like him is assaulting a police officer. Despite his mounting fear, Michael asks what he's going to do. Arrest him? In response, Pete points a gun at the man, saying that he'd rather kill him than arrest him. Once he's let go, Michael is literally shaken up. He's on the cusp of hyperventilating, but Pete only looks at him in disgust before leaving. Michael storms to Karen's school and pulls her aside to ask what's going on with her and Pete, so she incredulously explains that they just went out for coffee. Angered, he accuses her of leading Pete on and reveals that he put a gun to his head. Pete wants her. Karen is quick to retaliate that he didn't get those ideas from her, but Michael counters that he thinks she wants him too. Why would she talk to him about their marriage? What's it going to take for her to leave Pete, seeing her husband in a body bag? Realizing the gravity of the situation, Karen solemnly apologizes, and he silently takes her in his arms. In his desperation, Michael seeks help from Officer Roy, who tells him that every time Michael reacts, Pete retaliates. He then describes what happened the previous night, urging Roy to stop Pete before he destroys himself. Roy confronts Pete over his fixation on Karen, but he insists that he's good enough for Karen, and that he's better than Michael. Unmoved, Roy says that nothing will ever happen between them, and she's just a fantasy in his head. He then orders his partner to take a stress leave and seek psychiatric help, or get suspended. This doesn't sit well with Pete. One night, Roy and Pete stop at a food joint where they see Leon, a guy they know selling pills to someone. Though Roy wants to leave it, they chase Leon as he flees, and the guy eventually finds his way to his apartment. While an amused Roy searches him for contraband, Pete puts on his gloves and pulls his hidden gun to shoot Roy. He forces a very rattled Leon to take the gun and run, and once he does, Pete shoots him in the back. "You killed my partner, Leon," he coldly says. After the ordeal, he's interviewed about what happened, and he gives a very convincing performance as he cries and fabricates a story that completely absolves him of guilt. While inside his office, Michael sees from the window several police officers in his backyard. He becomes frantic and calls Graham's number but can't reach him. He realizes he has been framed by Pete, who's hidden narcotics in his house. The police start searching the premises, and one officer tells the couple that an informant called them and claimed he bought from Michael Carr. The police find a box containing narcotics in Michael's office and take him into custody. Detective Nobu promises to release him if he reveals his ties, but Michael is more compos mentis and demands his lawyer, for which he is detained. Graham speaks with Michael, telling him he will not be able to see Karen until after the arraignment. Given the desperate economic situation of the Carrs, they do not have the means to pay the bail for Michael. Graham, not being in a position to handle the case by himself, promises to get the best criminal lawyer for him. Michael pleads for bail, but this is denied for a prior crime that he swears he did not do, and the bail is set at $250,000. Pete visits Michael's cell laughing, revealing his plans to woo Karen. Meanwhile, Penny is keeping Karen company at her house. She's making breakfast when she notices Pete lingering outside. Realizing that the wary Penny won't open the door, he walks away, promising to come back later. When Penny opens the door to take the groceries, Pete pulls her away from the house. Meanwhile, Graham mortgages his house to hire the best criminal lawyer, Sam Gershon, and to post Michael's bail. Still thinking that Penny is cooking, Karen enters the kitchen to find Pete preparing a meal for the two of them. The telephone is off the hook, making it impossible for Michael to call Karen. As for Pete, he's completely lost in his delusion that Karen truly wants him, and when he notices how tense she is, he promises that he doesn't have to be a cop anymore. They just need to start a new life together. Since she knows that she has to play to his tune, Karen begrudgingly agrees and tells him to put his gun away since she hates those things. Pete readily complies, storing his gun and badge in a drawer. While he continues cooking, Karen tries to escape under the guise of fetching Tiny, but in doing so, she discovers Penny's corpse in a closet. Despite her shock, she suppresses her fear and acts normally in front of Pete, who feels that something is amiss. Meanwhile, Graham finally manages to bail Michael out, and he wastes no time in driving Graham's car and speeding through the streets. As for Pete, he keeps trying to make advances towards Karen, who plays along and pretends that she wants to dress better for him before they make love. In the bedroom, Karen looks everywhere for Michael's gun, and turns around to find Pete holding it. He asks if she's looking for that, so she pretends that she wants him to get rid of it. The tension's palpable between them, but in the end, Karen dresses into something nice and accepts Pete's kiss. During their moment, she manages to steal the gun from him, but when she shoots it, she realizes that there are no bullets. Pete mocks her for thinking that he'll let her get a loaded gun before trying to force himself on her. He angrily calls her a tease, saying she's nothing but a hoe, and she's no different from the other hoes in his life. Luckily, he stopped as his patrol car alarm goes off. He cuffs Karen to the bathtub and goes outside to investigate, knowing Michael has returned. While Karen's desperately trying to free herself, Michael finds and frees her. They try to escape, but Pete catches them, leading to a fierce brawl between him and Michael. Despite his determination, Michael is no match for Pete's police training. The security alarm is set off when Pete forces open the French doors. This prompts a call from the security company, and a smiling Pete pretends to be Michael. But he ends up giving the wrong password, and Michael smugly reveals that he changed it to something he doesn't know. Naturally, this pisses Pete off more, so he drags Michael upstairs while Karen is practically losing her mind in the bathroom. Pete demands her to open the door and escape with him, threatening to kill Michael, but her husband gently tells her not to listen since he'll get killed anyway. Amidst her mounting distress, Karen manages to take the glass paperweight before opening the door and smashing it into Pete's face. This finally gives Michael the chance to retaliate. Michael punches and pushes Pete down the stairs, rendering the bleeding man unconscious. The couple descends, with Michael pointing a gun at Pete. Since he looks like he's out of it, they proceed to exit the house, only for Pete to lumber towards them despite his heavily injured state. He challenges Michael to make a citizen's arrest, but he isn't interested in arresting Pete. Instead, he shoots him multiple times to make sure he's dead. As they wait for the police, Michael picks up Tiny from the floor and hands him over to Karen, relieved that the ordeal is finally over. Thus, the suburban nightmare comes to an end. And what does Michael have to show for it? Tiny finally letting Michael carry him. From start to finish, the story was one of an unraveling that exposed the insecurities that made up the contemporary life. First was Michael and Karen's house, which for all its beauty and impressiveness was worryingly penetrable. Then, Michael's need to constantly appease his investors, hints that he's not as well off as he could be. Of course, there's Karen potentially faced with the fact that Michael can't protect her, and Michael with the damning insecurity that he doesn't have the chops to keep his wife safe. Finally, the cherry on top is Pete, the man who hides behind his badge to unleash his violence and aggression. He's like Michael in Karen's house, as he merely gives the illusion of safety, but not the reality of it. However, even though Pete is aware of his power and standing, he still remains completely bereft. He finds himself alienated from people, as he emphasized the line that had to separate cops and civilians. Perhaps he was thinking more about himself, that he needed to be kept away from that boundary. He's also unable to form any meaningful relationships with women. He only ever has the companionship of, in his words, cheap and worthless women. Then again, there's hardly any hope for him to have a chance at a normal life that's ripe with genuine connections. His sinister tendencies aside, he looks down on women and on men who don't share his values. Despite everything that happened, Michael still didn't operate the way Pete did. The moment he was sure Pete was dead, Michael promptly let go of his smoking gun and left it on the floor to be with his wife and cat, because he was never a violent man, just one who needed to step to the bloody occasion.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.